Hello YouTube, and welcome back to another alternate history video, and this time I got the 1968 presidential election, which of course was held between Vice President Nixon and Vice President Humphrey, who of course was a sitting VP at the time under LBJ, and there was also a strong third-party challenger in George Wallace, who was able to win some southern states because he was a Dixiecrat, and a lot of the states of course were against civil rights in the South, so they voted for Wallace, who kind of ran as a populist too when it came to things like economics, but also ran as a Dixiecrat against civil rights, so he was able to do well in the South and, like I said, win some states. However, in this alternate scenario, I got the Republican nominee as George Romney, who was the governor of Michigan, and of course is the father of Mitt Romney. I got him as a nominee, but I still got Hubert Humphrey as a Democrat, and then of course still got Wallace as a third party, American Independent Party. So a little background on Romney. Like I said, he was the governor of Michigan. He was pretty moderate, kind of liberal almost, you could say. He was moderate on things like social issues and economic, more fiscal conservative, I guess, and like I said, socially moderate to liberal. He was kind of like a Rockefeller Republican, you could say. And like I said, he was the governor of Michigan, so he definitely has great Rust Belt appeal, that's for sure. And like I said, I got him as a Republican nominee if he did win it in '68. So getting into this, like I said, Wallace still wins some southern states. So I'm going to go ahead and give the states that he won. I believe he still would win them solidly. Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, his home state of Alabama where he was governor. Georgia, and I believe he won South Carolina. Could be wrong though. Okay, so it actually went to Nixon, so I'll take that off. But these are the states that Wallace won, like I said, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia, because he was a Dixiecrat, he had his southern appeal, so I think he would still win these, especially with Romney as the nominee, because both Romney and Hubert Humphrey were heavily for civil rights, while Wallace would be against them, so I believe he would hang on to the states that he won. Some Romney states, however, would be the Mountain West, like Wyoming, Utah, and Romney was a Mormon, so he definitely have great support in these states, having a lot of Mormon population. Montana, Idaho, I believe this would be solid for Romney, as well as the Dakotas, the Great Plains here, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma. Hubert Humphrey actually did pretty well in the southern part of Oklahoma, and Wallace did too. He actually took away quite a lot of vote in the southern part of Oklahoma, but the northern part went good for Nixon, so I believe Romney would do the same and win it. I believe he would take Oregon and California, which is Nixon's home state, of course, more Republican states back then. And Romney would do good in the suburbs in these states, having the right stances on certain social and economic issues. Washington, however, was won by Humphrey because he did pretty good in its suburbs, and Washington was known as a more dovish state when it came to foreign policy, and they didn't like the Vietnam War and all that, which dragged on, and LBJ's approval ratings went down because of it. And Humphrey actually, like I said, won the state because he did pretty good in its suburbs, like near Seattle, so I'll come back to that one. I believe a state like Nevada would go for Romney, though, very rural, and back then, not as much population, so I think he'd win that pretty easily. Same with Arizona and a state like Colorado, New Mexico. These states, of course, like I said, are very more rural back then and not as populated as they are now, so I think Romney will win these fairly well. Same with Alaska. Hawaii, however, I think is going to go for Humphrey. Of course, a very Democratic stronghold. He did well with the minority vote. I think he would win in some state of Minnesota, for sure. A state like Illinois, however, could be pretty competitive, but I believe Romney would do well in the suburbs around Chicago, and do well in Chicago itself. And Humphrey could do pretty well too, but since we go for Nixon, I think it would go Romney, since it was more of a Republican state, doing great in the suburbs, like I said. Missouri, I believe, did go for Nixon. Of course, he used to be a bellwether back then. And as you see there, it was very close, so a lot of the rural areas, of course, went for Nixon. So I think since Nixon was able to barely win it, I think Romney would win it in this case, but I mean, I could see it going for Humphrey maybe, because I don't know if Romney would have that same support, but I think since it was, like I said, a bellwether and usually went for the winner of the election, I think Romney could still win it, but I could see that one being a toss-up for sure. I think it would win the state of Indiana, very rural, of course, and Kentucky and Tennessee actually did go for Nixon. They were known as the border states. Of course, Wallace did pretty well in them being a Southern Dixiecrat. He did come in second in Tennessee. But because of vote splitting and Nixon doing good in the Eastern part, he was able to win it by a few points. However, I could see Wallace actually winning that in this scenario because, like I said, Romney was heavy for civil rights, kind of like Humphrey. And so I think that would turn off a lot of voters in the state of Tennessee, and I think Wallace actually would take it in this case, because it was only won by a couple points or so. So I could definitely see Wallace improving on his vote even more because of Romney's presence on the ticket, and definitely wouldn't like his position on civil rights. Same with Kentucky, too. Although Kentucky actually wasn't as close. As you see, Nixon did pretty well, and Humphrey did well here and throughout here, and Wallace did win a couple counties. However, Wallace didn't do as strong in Kentucky as he did Tennessee, so maybe I could still see this going for Romney, but I think it would narrow up some. But because of vote splitting, like I said, and Wallace not doing as strong, I could actually still see it going Romney, but I think it would definitely narrow up. But I could see Wallace maybe pulling out. Like I said, not being as strong as Tennessee performance, I think this could edge out Romney still, so we'll give it to him. A state like West Virginia, I believe, is going to go for Humphrey. Of course, it wasn't known as a Democratic state for many years. Very working class, so I think Humphrey would do well. A state like Wisconsin, I believe, did go for Nixon, and it did. Of course, they performed very well, like in the WOW counties, and even did good in western part of the counties, while Humphrey's greatest strengths were up here, but Nixon won it by a few points. And since Romney was from neighboring Michigan, I could see him winning it as well, because he would have his appeal, like I said, being from Michigan. And I believe Humphrey actually won Michigan. But with it being Romney, I could definitely see it flipping, because of it being his home state and having great suburban appeal. Of course, Humphrey did good upstate there, while Nixon did better like in rural areas. But with it being Romney's home state, though, I think it would go him, but I could see it being very narrowly, as in the margin that Humphrey won it by. But that's a home state factor, and his good appeal in suburban counties, I think would be enough for Romney to win it. Iowa was another state that went for Nixon, very rural back then, so I think it would go for Romney because I believe it was a solid margin. Ohio also went for Nixon by a few points there, as you see. Humphrey did good in the northeastern part where Democrats typically did good back then, while Nixon did better in the rest of the state. And Wallace also took away some vote, getting 11%. It was only by a narrow margin of 2.26%, as you see there. He did win. He did do good in like Columbus and Cincinnati, places like that, the suburban parts. So I think Romney would do the same and even improve in those places. So I think Romney would take the state by a few points. New York, getting into the northeastern, I believe it would definitely be competitive because Romney would have the right stances. But as you see there, Nixon did well statewide. It was about 5 points. And as you see there, Humphrey did go like in suburban places, so I think he would still win in this case, but I could definitely say narrowing up because of Romney having good appeal in the suburbs as well. So I could see really this going either way, but I will give it to Humphrey since he won against Nixon. However, Vermont and New Hampshire, I believe, are definitely going to go for Romney, as Vermont was a Republican state from statehood up until 1992, and New Hampshire was more Republican, and Romney is a perfect fit for it. With his stances, like I said, he was like a Rockefeller Republican, so I see him winning these states fairly easily. Maine, however, I could see going for Humphrey, because he had Edmund Muskie as a running mate. This was his home state, so I think Humphrey was still taking this case because of having Ed Muskie as a running mate. Massachusetts, I believe, did go for Humphrey. And it did by definitely a solid margin. So I think for that reason we'll go him against Romney because of its cultural liberalism. And Humphrey being very liberal on a lot of issues. Rhode Island, Connecticut, I believe were Humphrey states. And definitely wasn't competitive either, so I believe Humphrey would hang on to it. I think it would still in Connecticut, but I'm going to check the exact margin. See if I'll change my mind or not. Of course, Connecticut is more of a wealthy state, and it usually actually tended to lean more Republican. But Humphrey was able to do well in it. So since he did win it, I think he could win it against Romney here as well. New Jersey, however, was definitely more of a Republican state, and it was won by Nixon, so I think Romney would do the same. I think Humphrey, of course, would take D.C., and now Delaware and Maryland. Maryland was won by, Delaware was won by Nixon, so I believe Romney would do the same. And Maryland was where Spiro Agnew was from, the running mate of Nixon. But despite that, I did go for Humphrey, but by a couple points. So I think Humphrey would still win it if he did against Nixon. Now getting to these other remaining states, Pennsylvania was won by Humphrey. Of course, he had a good working class appeal. I think he did pretty well in the suburbs here. Well, Nixon did better elsewhere. Of course, Humphrey did go like in Erie County. I think I would go Humphrey because of his appeal in the state. He definitely had good stances like on healthcare and economics, things like that, that he was able to do well here, so I think he would still win against Romney. Virginia was a Republican state from 1952 up to 2004, with the exception of 64, so I think Romney would win it because of his performance in the suburbs in the state. And that does put him over the top there at 277. But for these remaining ones, Texas was won by Humphrey. Of course, Wallace did pretty good, I believe, in this area of the state. But Humphrey was able to go like in the suburbs. And I think a lot of rural areas too. But it was pretty close, I believe. As you see there, of course, Humphrey did well in the southern part too, because there is a lot of Hispanic population there. So I think because of that, Humphrey would still take it because of the Hispanic vote, and Wallace being on the ballot, taking away quite a lot of vote. Washington, like I said, is definitely competitive. It was won by Humphrey, and it was a dovish state. So I think because of that, Humphrey would take it, but still very narrowly, because Romney would have his pretty good appeal there. But I think since Humphrey was able to pull it off in the actual scenario, he would win it. North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida. I think Wallace came close to winning North Carolina, if I'm not mistaken. Of course, Nixon did go there in this western part, in the Appalachian part, but Wallace was able to do pretty well in this eastern part. I think Wallace would actually take North Carolina because, like I said, Romney was very strong on civil rights, so I think that'd be enough for Wallace to take this state. I could still say maybe going Romney because of the performance in the eastern part that Nixon was able to do, but I think this Romney's strong stance on civil rights would be enough to flip state to Wallace. Same in South Carolina even. It was pretty close there, so I think because of the civil rights issue, Wallace would win it. Florida is the last state. Of course, Wallace did great in the Panhandle, but I think Romney would do well enough in the I-4 corridor, Central Florida and Southern Florida, to actually win it. But I think it would be a nail-biter there. However, I will give it to Romney. And there's the final tally of Romney winning 291. Humphrey gets 170 and George Wallace gets 77. I thank you for watching, subscribe and hit the bell if you haven't, and I'll see you next time.